All right, good evening. We're ready to get started. We're at a fresh Mishnah, 3/4 of the way down on on-the-daf Beis, learning Daf and Zion. Somewhat of a complex sugya, and we'll be stopping at the second to last line on Zion and Beis, and then we'll pick up with the balance of a whole line tomorrow night. The new Mishnah reads as follows: bottom of Nun Vav Beis. Almana lekohen gadol, a restricted relationship. Grusha v'chalutza lekohen hedyot, a different type of restricted relationship. Mina erusin, from the time that they are betrothed, lo yochlu b'truma, because of the isser status of their relationship, then the wives are not allowed to eat truma. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Machshir, and they say that it is permissible to do so. Says Rashi, just to our left, a couple lines down. Dibur hamaschal, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Machshir, and ad shetibo elo v'taseh halala. Yes, she's muteres to eat that, but only until they have tashmish hamita. In other words, the psul of sleeping with this particular person of Isser is the psul that also leads to the Isser of eating truma. The Mishnah continues, if one of these relationships is severed via the death, nis armelu o nis garshu, so if this woman was married to the Kohen Gadol or the Grusha Chalutza to the Kohen Hedyot and the husband dies, so then it depends. Minha nisuin, if they are coming from a fully married relationship, then psulos lekahuna, psulos, they're forbidden to marry other Kohanim. And minha erisin, if in fact they were only betrothed and not fully married, then ksheris, they are allowed to marry a Kohen because they have yet to have tashmish hamita, so they're not fully married as it relates to the psul of Grusha v'chalutza. The Brisa reads as follows, starting the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom. Nun Vav Beis. Tanya Amar Tanya. The Brisa writes, Amar Reb Meir Kal V'chomer. Reb Meir says the following Kal V'chomer. Umakdu she'rishus ein ma'achilin. When you have two regular people, Yisraelim, who get married properly, ein ma'achilin, they're not allowed to eat truma. Rashi here has two girsos. We're not going to read the Rashi. It's a longer, complex Rashi, but Rashi basically says in the Havamina that when it says here in the Gemara, Kedushe Rishus, that we're talking about a Bas Kohen who's marrying Israel. Rashi rejects that. He has the famed language of Rashi that Libi Megangem, that he doesn't hold cup, and most of the Rishonim embrace his second approach is Lishna Achrina, that we're talking about two Yisraelim, and it makes sense in the flow of the Gemara as well. So let's go back to the beginning of this Gemara. What was the Kal V'chomer that Rav Meir stated? That when you have two Yisraelim, a man who is a Yisrael marrying a woman who's a Yisrael, ein ma'achilin, they're not allowed to eat truma, then Kedushe Avera, the betrothal of those who are usher to one another, lo kol shekain, of course they are not allowed to benefit from the truma. Says the Gemara, Amrulo, they said to him, the they in this case is Rebbe Lazar and Reb Shimon, the same authors of our Mishnah. So what did they say back to Reb Meir? Lo, you're incorrect. When it comes to people who are Kedushe Rishus, they're both Yisraelim. There's never an opportunity for them to ever eat truma because they're Yisraelim. How is that your starting point? Tomar b'Kedushe Avera. But when it comes to these men who are marrying women who they're not supposed to marry, but by them, had they married the right person, with a mutter person, so they try to reject Rabbi Meir's Kal V'chomer. Rabbi Meir's Kal V'chomer doesn't have a leg to stand on because the first part of the Kal V'chomer was two Yisraelim, and Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon say back to him, that's ridiculous. Those people never are allowed. The Gemara now tries to extend our halacha to the case of psuadaka. A psuadaka is an unfortunate scenario where a person's beitzim, where a person's testicles are damaged or crushed, and the pasuk in Chumash writes that they're not allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Shaya. Psuadaka, this man who's injured, and he's a Kohen, Shakidesh Bas Yisrael, he got engaged halachically to a Bas Yisrael. Banu lemachlokas Rav Meir, then this is where we see the machlokas with Rav Meir on one side, Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon on the other. Why? L'Rev Meir, Da'amar Mishtameres, the Biapsula Deoraisa Lo Achla, that the Mishtameres, one who is saved for Biapsula. In other words, this woman is engaged to a Kohen Psuadaka. She's not allowed to marry the Psuadaka. She's not allowed to be intimate with him because the pasuk says that he's not allowed to be entered into the kahal. So if that's true, and she's waiting for that tashmish hamita, they're only betrothed, but they're not yet married. So Reb Meir's of the opinion that because the future tashmish hamita is going to be an isur doraisa, therefore lo achla. Hanami, maybe we should say over here by the case of psuadaka that lo achla. And the Rebbe Lazar of Reb Shimon damar mishtameres to be a psula doraisa achla. But according to Rebbe Lazar of Reb Shimon, who argue on Reb Meir and say that until she has tashmish hamita with him, then she's allowed to eat the food. If that's true by Mishtameres to be a psula in general, then it's also true over here. Hanami here too, by Psua Daka, Achla, she should be allowed to eat until there's Tashmish Amita. And the Gemara says that maybe this is really not comparable to our Mishnah. Mimai. How do you know that this is comparable to our Mishnah? Dilma, perhaps in our Mishnah, Ad kan lo ka'amre Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Hassam, ela diyesh lo lahachil b'makom acher. That in our Mishnah, the case of, let's say, a Kohen who's marrying a Grusha v'chalutza, or a Kohen Gadol who's marrying an Almana, at least there's a way to make it mutter. Aval hacha by Psua Daka, de'ein lo lahachil b'makom acher lo. He's never going to be able to enable a woman to have any food at all, because the second they sleep together, she becomes a psula because she slept with a man who's a Psua Daka. So he's still able to have tashmish amita potentially. Just there's no zera, there's no testicles. Fine, understand, but that is a psul. It's a psul daraisa, and she then becomes forbidden to truma. And if you want to say 4 lines down in Zayin and Aleph, then maybe we can say that the din of a Psua Daka is that he can't marry someone who's fully, properly part of Klal Yisrael, but he could marry someone who's not part of the Kahal. And according to this, and we'll see this machlokes in the Tanaim to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, a bas gerim, a woman who is a daughter of gerim, is herself not fully into a kahal. According to this shita, a woman who is a giores, her children are not considered fully part of the kahal until a child in that lineage is born from the woman who's born Jewish. So we don't pass it in this way, but Lamaisa, the way that it would work out is if you have a couple who's a ger and they have a daughter, so because her parents weren't born Jewish, so therefore she's not fully part of the kahal. If she's not fully part of the kahal, she can marry a Psua Daka. They'll never have children. He's sterile, but at least she can marry a Psua Daka. So says the Gemara, then maybe we can say v'chitema hachanami, here by the Psua Daka, there is a woman he could marry and enable to eat truma. Yesh lo lahachil bebas gerim, says the Gemara. That's not necessarily true. Why not? Because v'hami boy la Rabbi Yochanan me Rabbi Oshaya below pashile. As we'll see the story in a couple of minutes in the Gemara, this was a question that was posed from Rabbi Yochanan to Rabbi Oshaya below pashile, and there was no answer. So how then do we understand the case of Psua Daka? So says the Gemara 2 different answers, and then we'll explain why one answer doesn't embrace the other. Itmar, the Amoraim discuss. Abaye Omar Hoelu Ma'achila below Yada. If there was a case scenario where he was able to provide his wife with truma without yada, without them having tashmish amita, like below Yada eschava ishto, from like the biblical no of that they were intimate. So what's the Gemara discussing here? Rashi explains this case on the side. We're not going to read it inside, but Rashi says the case is where the couple got married under the appropriate pretenses. He was a healthy man. And then he got injured, and he became a Psua Daka. He was damaged, but they had yet to have Tashmish Amita since he was damaged. In that case, he is a Kohen married to a woman who is allowed to eat truma. So the Gemara says, because the Psua Daka is able to still enable his wife to have truma after an injury, but before they have Tashmish Amita, all is well and good. But Rava Amar he says, well, okay, you're right that he disagrees with Abaye. You're right that he's not able to help his wife in this area. However, he is able to enable his avadim shvachos and shvachos kananim to eat truma because they work for him, because he's allowed, they're allowed. Why didn't these two shitas hold like one another? Abaye lo amar ki Rava. Why not? Abaye said that he is able to maintain his marriage to this woman. They just can't have tashmish amita once he becomes a Psua Daka. Why does Abaye not hold like Rava? Because kinyan deishus mi kinyan deishus yalfina, because it's not a level playing field. What were you talking about? Rava was talking about a case of slaves. V'lo yalfina kinyan deishus mi kinyan de'avadim. That doesn't make sense. You're trying to extrapolate from our discussion about marriage to avadim. That's not what we're talking about. So that's not a case that Abaye was willing to bend to. The Rava lo amar ki Abaye. Why didn't Rava say like Abaye? Because shani hasam shekvar achla. It's different in a case where a couple was married and the husband was healthy, and only then he became a Psua Daka, because there she was already muteres in eating the truma from when he was a healthy man, even before Psua Daka. Says Abaye, that doesn't work. Abaye, he says, why is it that he doesn't? What would Abaye say back to the answer of Shekvar Achla? Says the Gemara, Shekvar Achla lo amrina. That's not an argument to say that they that she was already muteris to eat while the husband pre-injury. Because the ilote mahachi, we can't say this, because if we did, then bas Yisrael shenises lakohen. If you have a regular Yisrael who's married to a kohen, she's allowed to eat truma under those circumstances. But umis, if in fact the husband then died, techul, maybe we should argue she should eat shekvar achla because she's already been eating. That's a ridiculous argument. Once an Ashes, a Yisrael who's married to a kohen, once her husband dies, she loses her rights. So we therefore see shekvar achla is not a good svara, and that's why Rava doesn't agree. That's why Abaye doesn't agree with Rava. What would Rava say with Rava? No, those cases are not comparable to start with. Hasam paka kinyane. When the kohen dies, that marriage is done for. However, hacha by the ptsua daka, they're still halachically married. Lo paka kinyane, and therefore this machlokas Abaye and Rava as to how we understand the relevance of ptsua daka to our Mishnah. That is what the discussion is with Rava, with Abaye saying that because in theory he could still provide his wife with truma, being a ptsua daka without tashmish hamitza. So therefore, we could understand his din at the bottom of the page, and Rava with his answer about the ability to provide truma to shvachos and avadim who are Canaan. Now let's analyze what actually happened. The Gemara made reference to the fact that there was this unanswered question about the ptsua daka. Gufa, the Gemara says a third of the way down on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. If you have a ptsua daka kohen and he married a bas gerim, he married the daughter of someone, a couple who's a ger, who are gerim, mahu sheyachilena betruma. Are we allowed to give her truma? And there was a long, quiet pause in the room. Ishtik v'lo amar le v'lo midi. I called Reb Shalom Kamenetsky today to ask a shaila. Just an unbelievable experience listening to a gadol ask specific questions and then pause for tremendous lengths of time. After asking him this shaila, it was a chinuch shaila, and he said back to me, and I'm quoting, "These are dinei nefashos, and dinei nefashos require lina. I need to talk to you tomorrow. I have to think about it." The patience and the care and the delicacy of his answer, to not rush to give an answer. He's Rav Shalom Kamenetsky. What is he pondering? Well, that needs a little bit of patience. But here in the Gemara, they didn't even answer the ishtik, total silence. Great question, like dead silent. So it says the Gemara, ishtik v'lo amar le v'lo midi. Okay, so he didn't even answer the question. So Rabbi Yochanan was left in the lurch. L'sof, a little bit later in the day, asa gaber Rabba Achrina, another great person came to ask a shaila from Rabbi Oshaya. Says the Gemara, and this great person asked a different question to Rabbi Oshaya. And Rabbi Oshaya answered, who was this great person? Reish Lakish. Now, Rabbi Yehuda was standing in the room. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda Nisia. This is the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He says, the Rabbi Oshaya, Atu Rabbi Yochanan lav gaver Rabbahu. Why you just ignored Rabbi Yochanan? Why didn't you answer his question? You answered Reish Lakish. Why didn't you answer Rabbi Yochanan? It's not nice. Says the Gemara, Amar le the kaboy minoi milsa the lesle pasre. There's no solution to his question. We don't know the answer to his question. So let's review the question, and then the Gemara is going to try and analyze the question. To be clear, the Rishonim highlight this. Rabbi Oshaya is done talking. He left the question as an unknown. Strange, the Gemara doesn't say teku, just ishtik. Okay, fine, but whatever the case may be, he didn't answer the question. The Gemara is now going to make an extensive effort, and it will end on the very last line of the page to answer this question. But it is not Rav Oshaya talking; it's the Gemara trying to figure it out. So, what was our question? Just to review before we dig in, we had said Rav Yochanan's question was that if there's a ptsua daka kohen, a kohen who is damaged, and he marries bas gerim, he marries the daughter of gerim, is she allowed to eat truma? Says the Gemara Liman. Who is Rabbi Yochanan's question going like? Ila Rabbi Yehuda, if it's like the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, we haven't seen this Shita yet, but we're about to see it now, then Bein B'Kedush Kai, Bein La B'Kedush Kai, whether or not this Ptsua Daka as a Kohen holds on to his Kedusha, it doesn't matter, Lo Achla. So therefore by him, it can't be a question, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, we know the answer, which is Lo Achla, for sure. How does the Gemara parse out the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda? When we say that the Ptsua Daka maintains his Kedusha, why is it that his wife would not be able to eat? Bas ger zachar ke bas chalal zachar, because the bas ger is treated like a bas chalal, and therefore she's completely not fit for truma. And he lav b'kedush koi, if in fact he no longer maintains his kedusha, still lo achla. Why? Damrinun kal ger mikri kal, because she is part of the kal, and a kal is not allowed to marry up to a daka, and if they do get married, she'll be forbidden from eating the truma. All of that is according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the question of Rabbi Yochanan can't be within the camp of Rabbi Yehuda, because across the board, Rabbi Yehuda would hold that this woman could not eat truma. So let's try another Tana. Either Rabbi Yossi, according to the sheet of Rabbi Yossi that we're about to learn, says the Gemara, bein b'ktush koi, bein la b'ktush koi, achla, no matter what, according to all circumstances, Rabbi Yossi would allow this woman who is married to a Daka Kohen to eat the truma. Why? Let's parse out his shita. If in fact the Ptua Daka maintains his status as a Kohen, so the Achla, why is she allowed to eat? To Amar, Rabbi Yossi was of the opinion, Af ger shenasa giores bito ksher lekahuna. Big machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that the bas ger was not shaykh to the Kohen. Rabbi Yossi says that the bas ger, the daughter of a ger, is allowed to marry a Kohen, and therefore, because that's the case, she's ksher lekahuna, so there's no isser. She's allowed to marry the kahuna, and therefore she would be allowed to eat the truma. And why is it that if, according to Rabbi Yossi, if he maintains his kedusha as a kohen, why is it that achla, that she's allowed to eat? Because he argues on another point as well with Rabbi Yossi against Rabbi Yehuda, the ha'amar kal gerim lo ikri kal. That the group of Gerim in that first generation are not Ikri Kahal, they are not considered to be part of the Kahal, and therefore he's allowed to marry her. Up to a Daka only can't marry. His restriction is only by fully Jewish women. Now the Gioris is halachically Jewish, but she's not considered Begeder Kahal of the people, and therefore the Ptua Daka can marry her, and therefore Achlas. So says the Gemara, as of now, we don't even understand Rabbi Yochanan's question to start with. It can't be according to Rabbi Yehuda where the answer is clearly lo achla. It can't be according to Rabbi Yossi where the answer is clearly achla, she can eat. Therefore, says the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more actually, Ella, it must be that Rabbi Yochanan's question is aliba da haitana, is like the shita of the different tan. Ditna, and the Mishnah writes, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Isha bas Gerim, if you have a woman who's the daughter of Gerim, lo tinase lekehuna, ad shetehei ima mi Yisrael. She's not allowed, this bas Ger is not allowed to marry a Kohen until Shetehei Imam Yisrael, until her mother is Jewish, meaning it has to be not the first generation, but the second generation. This was Rabbi Yochanan's question. Do we say in regards to this ger that kashros mitov saba ve'achla, she's really kshera, but not part of the kahal, and therefore she can eat, because if she's not part of the kahal, then she's allowed to marry the Ptua Daka. Oh, dilma kedusha mitos baba, that now that she is fully Jewish, she has kedusha, she's part of the kahal, and therefore velo achla. So says the Gemara, now that we framed out Rabbi Yochanan's question as though looking through the lens of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who says that it really depends. If we look at her as a kosher but not as a kadosh, so then we could understand why by a kosher she's allowed to eat. She's not part of the kahal. But if she's a kadosh, if she is part of the kahal, then the Ptua Daka is not allowed to marry her. So Tashma, let's see if the Gemara can provide an answer. Ki asa Rav Acha bar Chinana midroma, when Rav Acha bar Chinana came from the south, he brought a Mishnah in his hand, and something that not everybody else had necessarily heard. It might have been learned in a new base medrash down south. An explicit brisa to answer Rav Yochanan's question. Rav Yochanan just had never seen the brisa. Okay, what does the brisa say? From where do we know that a Kohen that's a Ptua Daka who marries a Bas Gerim, that she is allowed to eat truma? Shene'emar b'Kohen ki yikna nefesh kinyan kasbo yochal bo. We see from the pasuk explicitly that if there's a kinyan nefesh, that the person is allowed to eat, and that would be the case over here in regards to the ger. Leman, says the Gemara, how does this answer work? According to Rabbi Yehuda, this would never work, because as we learned above, ha'amar bein biktushte koi, bein la biktushte koi, lo achla. Rabbi Yehuda said across the boards that she's not allowed to eat under the circumstances, and Rabbi Yossi was also across the boards, but in the other direction. Either Rabbi Yossi, lama likra, ha'amar bein biktushte koi, bein la biktushte koi, achla. So it doesn't work. The question never works according to Rabbi Yehuda and according to Rabbi Yossi. Ella, it must be like the Gemara recommended. Lav, it must be the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It must be that this giores is considered a kosher, not part of the kahal, and therefore she is allowed to marry the Ptua Daka, because the Ptua Daka is allowed to marry a woman who is not part of the kahal, and a giores, according to the shita, is not part of the kahal. Shmamina. From the Gemara, it seems to be that we paskin that a giores is not part of the kahal, which is a fascinating din. And therefore she can marry someone who's a Ptua Daka. Very big halachic nafkaminas. Most people don't advertise these kinds of medical conditions, but had there been a group of people who were sterile due to damage to beitzim, then they would be allowed to marry a woman who is a baski, or they'd never have kids, but that would be the din. That's how it would work out.
But if a couple is married and then this injury happens, do they have to get divorced?
Yeah. It's a deraisa for them to be together.
They have to get divorced or they're not allowed to marry?
They're already, no, he's saying they're already married.
Yeah.
So they would
I don't know
look
if that's true.
Why?
I don't know if that's true. They have to get divorced. Lo Yavo means they shouldn't get married.
No, there's no Tashma Shemitah. That was the case at the top of the page. Rashi says this at the top of the page. Rashi says, "Dibra maskal hola ma'achila below yada'a hayanasui kohen isha ve'ocheles betruma." That if a woman was married to a kohen and she was eating truma, v'nasa p'tzua daka, and then he got injured, he got a terrible injury, and so Rashi's the fourth line into the thinner lines. Dibra hamaskal hola ma'achila. So Rashi says, hayanasui kohen isha. A man was married, a kohen was married to a woman, Yisrael. Ve'ocheles betruma, and she was able to eat truma because it was a regular marriage. Everybody's healthy. And then v'nasa p'tzua daka, then he gets injured. U'ba'aleha, then lo sochal betruma, the shavya chalala, the nivala pasula. So could they stay married? Maybe, but they could never have tashma shemitah again because it'll make her into a chalala.
If we hold on, and that's true.
It's only the second or something like, or is it just?
No, I don't think so. I think this is, the vasectomies are usher to get, but that's not a p'sua daka. I don't think so.
He starts talking specifically a kohen where he can't be married to a halal. If he
Right.
The p'sul is in her because he's a p'sua daka. It happens to be talking about a kohen. Then we show him to pick up on this.
He makes her
She's a halala.
and then she can't be married to him because he's a kohen. It's like a circle.
Oh, that's a good point. Say that one more time.
He's a p'sua daka.
When he gets injured. So then if they have tashma shemitah, he passes her because she's a p'sua, because he is a p'sua daka.
Makes her into a halal. I'm not
And
sure
makes her into a
why.
halal.
That's only a
I think it's a
That's
coin.
Right, that's only a coin. That's not for.
She became a halala denivala lepasula.
Right.
Being lo yada, had they not been together, mishenase p'sua daka harezu ochelas, and that's Mishnah beperaka ara. Alma says the end of Rashi. Matzinu, we found the case of p'sua daka kohen ma'achil b'makom acher. We found the case. This goes back to the original question about hilkach b'kedusha avera nami ma'achil kozman shelo asa halala. So the Gemara here was just highlighting a case where we can have a kohen who's a p'sua daka who could still have a woman eat truma based on their relationship. But some of the Rishonim discussed the juxtaposition actually makes it complicated where he's a kohen and a p'sua daka. And it may be because of what you're highlighting of that cyclical nature of the tashma shemitah, that when the p'sua daka has relations with this woman, even after they've been married, but he was injured and now they're together for the first time after he's healed enough from his injury to have tashma shemitah. So then she becomes a p'sula, a halala. And then it's usher for him to be married. But wouldn't we assume that if there's an isser,
it's her, not him.
yeah, that's true. But wouldn't we assume anyways that a p'sua daka, if you're married, it's a nebuch scenario, but you have to get divorced. You have to assume that.
I think so.
You have to assume that you're allowed to stay married without tashma shemitah. You have chiyuvim to your wife.
Well, it's also for you to fulfill that.
It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Okay, I don't know. I don't know how that works. Mitzvah of ona is a mitzvah d'oraisa.
Well, the assumption is that you're able to have it, you just can't.
No, they're
or
not.
You can't be molded.
No, he can't. The tashmish shemitah lo ba'aleha, uba'aleha. That's what Rashi says.
Right,
Even if they have
so
tashmish once,
It-
that's by the case of p'sua daka.
In a stam case by Suadaka,
Yeah.
it works, he just can't be molded. So his responsibilities, he can keep up, he just can't be molded.
It's actually a very good point.
I don't understand. Isn't
He
the
won't be able
tash?
to impregnate her,
That's true.
but he'll be able to keep up his obligations. So
No, I don't think they're allowed to have tashmish shemitah.
By the Kohen or
It sounds
stam?
like Ryan's
Stop,
saying it's
stop.
only a problem if it's a
I
kohen.
think it's only a
if
problem,
it's
it's
a
a Kohen,
halal.
like I was saying. Because
He's not
makes it
saying-
into a
I hear what you're
halal.
saying because of the
Yeah.
cycle that you were mentioning. What the pasuk says about this,
Well, but if it comes an injury later, I'm not sure.
I don't know. Probably should learn some Chumash. All right, let's go. Says the Gemara at the very bottom of the page, Itmar. The rest is pretty short. And it says the Gemara, Itmar, Rav Amar, turning to the top of Nun Zayin with Beis. Yesh, did you hear the endorphins are saturating our synapses? Says the Gemara, Yesh chuppah lipsulos. There's like a billion ways to, when you read this the first time, there's like so many ways that we could potentially understand this. And without Rashi, we never would have understood it the way that it should be understood. That's just whatever. Yesh chuppah lipsulos. Take a look at Rashi. Kohen gadol shehichnes almana Bas Kohen lechuppah below ba'aleha. So they're engaged. They're not even engaged. He brought her to a chuppah. Umeikara nami lo kitsha, and they didn't even have a betrothal. They went straight to chuppah. So says the Gemara, yesh chuppah lepsulos, that the chuppah does count lepsulos to make them into psulim. Ushmuel amar ein chuppah lepsulos. However, Amar Shmuel modeli Abba. Abba is Rav, the term of endearment of Abba, the father. Betinok pechusa mibas shaloshan of Yom Echad hol ve'ein la bia ein la chuppah. That there would be no din of chuppah by her. Let's go back to and finish that Rashi just for a moment. It says Rashi on the second line that umeikara nami lo kitcha afilu hachi pasla mitruma. So yesh chuppah lepsulos means that it's enough chuppah that it would ruin her from truma, and ein chuppah lepsulos means that she's not ruined from truma. And what Shmuel was saying is that, of course, I hold that ein chuppah lepsulos, but even Rav, who holds yesh chuppah lepsulos, would agree if the girl is less than 3 years old. We know that, of course, the age of 3, she's not re'uya lebia. What's the Mari Makom for this? Amar Rava Afana Nami Tanina. We have a brisa. We're not going to go into too much detail on this brisa, but let's learn the majority of it. Says the brisa. Bas shaloshan of Yom Echad, not our case. Our case, we were saying, is she's less than 3. But if you have a girl who is 3 years old and one day mis kadesh es bibia, she's old enough for the act of tashmish amita to be considered kiddushin, marriage. And if a yavam was with this, really, he's the yavam, right? And he's with her. So then they're married. With a girl who's 3 years and a day, then that's an isser of tashmish ish, tashmish amita. It's an isser of eshes ish. Umetama is boala latama mishkav tachton ke'elyon. You can see Rashi, see them in Forshim here. We're not going to get into this now, but various versions of tuma, of tachton and elyon, that when she's that age, then the halachos of tuma apply. Nises lekohen, if she marries a kohen ocheles betruma. Ba'aleha echad mikol apsulin pasla. That if in fact someone who's a pasal is with her, it can invalidate her from kahuna. That says the Gemara. That's bas shalosham b'yom echad duhu d'mepasla b'bia mifsala b'chuppah. The mefasta b'bia mifsala b'chuppah. I put my comma in the wrong place there. So where there's a psul in bia, so therefore she's mifsala l'chuppah. However, hapchusa mi bas shalosh shana b'yom echad. If she wasn't 3 years old, so then the lo mifsala b'bia, where she doesn't become psula from tashmish amita, then lo mifsala nami b'chuppah. Even Rav would agree with Shmuel that there is no chuppah in this case to passel her from truma. Shema mina, that is in fact how we would learn out this case. So yes, there is a machlokes, but even Rav would agree that ein chuppah l'psulos for a girl who's under the age of 3 years and a day. We'll stop right here and pick up tomorrow at the very bottom of Nun Zayin and Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
I want to say